This is Guns and Butter.
There's something happening here. Yeah. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there.
If you had all the money that was owed by subprime borrowers, all the bad mortgages, that's less than $1 billion. So they need someone to misrepresent the situation as a cover, an umbrella story for the big giveaway.
I'm Bonnie Faulkner. Today on Guns and Butter, Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, The New Junk Economics, From Democracy to Neoliberal Oligarchy. Michael Hudson is a financial economist and historian. He is president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trend, a Wall Street financial analyst, and distinguished research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. His 1972 book, Super Imperialism, The Economic Strategy of American Empire, is a critique of how the United States exploited foreign economies through the IMF and World Bank. He is also author of Trade, Development, and Foreign Debt. Dr. Hudson has written many articles on the current global financial crisis. A few of his most recent articles that we discussed today are Mr. Obama's Junk Economics, Democrats Relinquish the Populist Option to the Republicans, the Bernanke Reappointment, Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid, and his speech to the Labour Party in Australia, The Counter-Enlightenment, Its Economic Program, and the Classical Alternative. Dr. Hudson, welcome.
Thank you very much, Bonnie.
You write that the independence of the Federal Reserve is a euphemism for financial oligarchy. What do you mean by that?
The central banks use the Federal Reserve as their lobbying institution within the government, and the Federal Reserve creates the free credit to give to the banks, and the banks use this credit to bid up asset prices. And in the United States, 1% of the population owns about two-thirds of the revenue from wealth, that is interest, dividends, rents, and capital gains. So the function of the financial system is to increase the price of houses, real estate, buying a retirement income relative to wages. And in that sense, it's the FIRE sector, the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, relative to the rest of the economy, labor and industrial capital.
Now, just to clarify for people who don't understand the Fed, that is a private organization, isn't it?
It's technically a commercial bank has to join the Federal Reserve by buying stock in it, but it's really run by the government. On the other hand, Wall Street has veto power over whoever the government appoints to the Fed or to the Treasury. So, in effect, Wall Street tells the government who to employ to give away government resources back to the private sector. Most wealth throughout history has always been taken from the private sector, either militarily by invading a country and taking over the land and the commons, but today it's done financially by taking over a government, basically, and privatizing the government's resources, or in the case of the Fed, letting the banks create free credit to buy out resources that are being privatized, largely in other countries. Their phone systems, communication systems, telephone systems, water, mineral rights, oil, gas, everything.
How does the Fed create credit?
It's simply the same way a bank does. A bank will go to the Fed and say, we need to borrow $1 billion at 0.25%, and so the Fed will just write a deposit. The bank will sign an IOU to the Fed, all electronically, for $1 billion, and the Fed will credit a deposit. That's just what a commercial bank does if somebody goes in. It's credits that create deposits, not the other way around, like it used to be. Most people think that what banks lend out are the money that depositors put in, but many banks start out without any money at all and without any deposits, and they will make a loan to somebody and just create a deposit and say, okay, you give us the IOU, we'll have that on our assets, and we will create a bank deposit for you in a similar amount. You'll pay us interest, and if you spend the money elsewhere and we don't get the money back, we'll just go to the Federal Reserve and borrow from them at 0.25%, and we'll lend to you at 5% or 10%, or if you're a credit card customer, 30%. So the banks borrow from the Fed at 1/4% and lend it to the credit card users at 30%, and that's how they make the money to pay themselves bonuses and buy the big bank buildings that they build.
So deposits are actually created by loans.
That's correct.
See, that's something I think that is mystified a lot of people.
That's right. It's not taught very much even in the universities, except at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, where I'm associated with. But that's the key. And John Kenneth Galbraith wrote that the essence of how banks work is so counterintuitive. It's so much against what the average person thinks of as being fair and normal that there's just cognitive dissonance. People don't want to understand it. And that's what the banks depend upon. They need somebody like Bernanke, or even better, Obama, to misrepresent the situation and make it appear as if the government has to bail out the banks, as if the banks are necessary for the economy to work, as if speculation and derivatives gambling, as if you had to give the banks $13 trillion in the last year, or the economy would have collapsed. When in fact, if you add up, according to the recent government release last week, if you had all the money that was owed by subprime borrowers, all the bad mortgages, that's less than $1 billion. So they need someone to misrepresent the situation as a cover, an umbrella story for the big giveaway.
Now, is that why you have written that money is debt?
Yes, all money is debt. The money in your when you write a check to somebody, you're writing against your debt. When the government issues money, that's technically a debt on the government's balance sheet, a liability that it gets in exchange for an asset. That's basic account keeping. And so the money you have in the pocket, the money in your savings accounts, or your checking accounts, all have their counterpart in bank loans to somebody else. So in America, for instance, 90% of the savings are owned by the richest 10% of the population, and they're lent out to the bottom 90% is debt. So the savings of the financially wealthy classes are lent out to the debtor classes, and they charge interest for this, and this is why people's living standards have not risen since 1979. Wage levels haven't risen because the economic surplus, despite all of the increase in productivity, has been used to pay interest and financial charges on this increasing credit that's been issued. And one party's credit is another party's debt, as I said.
Now, supposedly all of the money in circulation actually is supposed to represent some sort of collateral, isn't it?
Not in the case of government. What backs a government money isn't actually hard collateral. It's the government's ability to tax. And in fact, people need money in order to pay their taxes. This has been the case for the last 5,000 years, going back to Sumer, Babylonia. If the government would levy taxes in silver or grain, then people needed silver, or they needed to sell the grain to silver to pay the taxes in. Similarly, governments issue paper currency, and they make sure that there's a use for the paper currency by levying taxes. So if the government didn't tax back this money, then there'd be very little need for people to have a paper currency, and they'd handle their finances in a different way, which is why governments traditionally have taxed so much, but they're reducing that now. And as they reduce taxes in the United States, there's much less use for the dollar, and the dollar tends to decline. If the government were to abolish taxes, then there would be no need for individuals to obtain dollars to pay the taxes, and there wouldn't be a market for the dollars, and the dollars would decline.
Right. So what gives the dollars their worth to the government is its ability to tax the citizenry in dollars.
Yes. This is what was called the state theory of money, developed by Georg Friedrich Knapp back early in the 20th century.
But then what's the difference between that and the bank's creation of money?
Very little. The bank's creation of money often has nothing in back of it at all, and that's certainly the case with the Federal Reserve. So the banks are able simply to get money from the Federal Reserve, and the idea